Hello, fellow foodies, and welcome back. This is Dr. Cassandra Quave, and you're listening to Foodie Pharmacology, the science podcast for the food curious. This week on the show, we're going to dive into one of my favorite food categories, and that is mushrooms. We're going to be speaking with Hamilton Pevec. He is an ethnomycologist, an entrepreneur, and filmmaker who's dedicated his career to advancing medicinal mushroom efficacy and mycological science. He's the president of the Western Colorado Mycological Association and the founder of Hamilton's Mushrooms, a premium mushroom extract company. As an advisor to Colorado Governor Jared Polis, Hamilton has contributed to the Natural Medicinal Health Act rulemaking, and he continues to be a trailblazer for mushroom product development standards within the state. Hamilton lectures frequently at mycological societies nationwide and is one of the organizers and a guide for multiple international fungi forays. Those sound like fun. His documentary mini-series featuring renowned mycologists and rare fungi stories has received over 100,000 views. Hamilton is actively involved in the Telluride Mushroom Festival, North America's largest mushroom festival, and his company, Hamilton's Mushrooms, supplies mushrooms and extracts to the world's leading mushroom brands. So welcome to the show, Hamilton. It's really great to meet you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Cassandra. Appreciate it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, first of all, I thought maybe you could tell us a little bit more about the Telluride Festival because I've seen images of this before on Instagram, but I've never had a chance to go. What is this festival like? I imagine that it brings together a lot of really interesting people.
Absolutely. The mushroom community is super eclectic and cross sectional and intersectional. And the festival is North America's largest mushroom festival. And it strikes the perfect balance between academia and culture. So you have, the latest research presenters, you have, high-end mycologists, high-end mycology workshops from identification and taxonomy to microscopy and DNA testing, and then you have like paper making workshops and costume making workshops and expert guided forays, and then we have dance parties and parades and like the whole thing. So
Right.
it covers a lot of ground, both from the scientific perspective and the cultural perspective, and it draws a lot of people every year to Telluride.
Amazing. So,
Mm.
one other thing I noted that you do is you also help lead these fungal forays. And
Mm.
for the listeners out there that have never been on a fungi foray with a lot of fun guys, tell us, what is that like? What happens on a foray?
Well, it's about making observations in nature. So we take groups into the forest or wherever mushrooms are growing at that time of year. Usually it's in the forest or the mountain, high riparian zones in Colorado. And we make observations about what we find and talk about, identification, practical applications, medicinal uses. The style of the foray really depends on who's leading it and what they're
Mhm.
interested in. And for me, going on forays with other expert guides is really critical for my continuing education in mycology, because I get to learn what their unique data set is, their unique set of knowledge in general, and then I get to share my unique set of knowledge with whoever I take on forays. And so the idea is just to observe and learn and be in our environment together in a meaningful way.
Amazing. I think it must be a little bit like it is for me with my botanist friends when we go on, plant walks. We don't call them forays. We call it botanizing, where we, go on a very slow hike because we keep stopping and
Yeah.
like bending down to the ground with our hand lens, looking at this or that. Our
Oh yeah,
fungal foray is kind of similar, right?
absolutely. You
Yeah.
don't plan on making miles when you're going on a foray. And I would propose, that we can foray for plants as well. I mean,
Yeah.
foray is really just another expression of the word forage.
Mhm.
But it's not necessarily we're going out to collect specimens, although in many cases we are. It's about just being immersed in your environment and learning about the plants, the animals, and the fungus that's out there for us to learn about.
Amazing. Well,
And
this is
sometimes you get to find a honey hole of chanterelles or porcinis and,
oh, nice.
share
Yeah.
share the bounty with everybody.
Then you have a great feast afterwards.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, this is a food podcast and a podcast that covers kind of this intersection between food and medicine. And I'm really interested in this concept of also of functional medicine and how food kind of serves along that spectrum, service
Yeah.
in the spectrum of health. What can you share with us about your understanding of the role that fungi play in supporting our health?
So many. Where do I begin? I mean, this is kind of the question that was making me nervous because it is so broad.
Yeah.
You know, fungi in a way are kind of the functional food, and food, in my philosophy, is the foundation of all medicine. You know, taking it back to the "you are what you eat"
Mhm.
ethos, and mushrooms really embody that for the most part. But just as like a very brief overview from a nutritional standpoint, mushrooms provide essential nutrients to us in many um, elegant ways. So, for example, the fiber. Mushrooms have the highest concentration and best prebiotic fiber of any food, which means it passes through our upper digestive tract and into our lower digestive tract where it can feed our microbiota and become prebiotic. And in this way, it activates an immune response. And there are plenty of studies that show how important this is for our general health, longevity, depression, um, immune regulation, anti inflammation, like so many benefits just from eating mushrooms, like just on the most basic level. And that doesn't even really get into, the active compounds that are found throughout many different species and novel compounds that are unique to very specific species.
Mhm.
And this is like, I do 2-hour lectures on this kind of thing alone, so I don't want to like get too deep into this. What I'm curious about is like, for you, like, where does your knowledge of medicinal mushrooms and food intersect, and how, like, maybe we can use that as a kickoff point to go
Yeah.
deep in a particular direction.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a bit ashamed to say I am very poorly educated when it comes to fungal identification. I've collaborated with mycologists in the field, which is a great pairing when you have a botanist and mycologist working together because I'm able to kind of really observe and collect the plants, and they're able to really observe and collect and understand
Yeah.
how people are using mushrooms, especially in local cuisine. I've done a bit of that in the Mediterranean, in
Nice.
Sicily of all places, which is not a place you would think of getting a lot of mushrooms. It's very arid and dry, but in the autumn, there are a number of interesting edible mushrooms. I guess one thing we could dive into is this concept of around specificity because,
Yeah.
if I go to the grocery store, like many of our listeners, and I buy some button mushrooms or maybe even some portobellos, you know, is eating a portobello mushroom going to give me the same health benefit as eating, for example, a chanterelle? I know that they taste different. Taste all comes down to chemistry. So, what can you share with us about that? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
are these at all related? I'm
Yeah.
imagining they're quite different, um, just based on their flavor and color.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, maybe just give us a little bit of an understanding of how what this spectrum of diversity looks like in mushrooms, because mushroom as a term covers a huge diversity of
Yeah.
life. Yeah.
Indeed, it does. So just starting off, like at the average American grocery store, you're going to have white button mushrooms, crimini, and portobello. Those are
Mhm.
like the fundamental basics of a mushroom selection at a grocery store. But what most people don't understand is that this is all the same species of mushroom, Agaricus bisporus.
Oh, I had no idea. Wow,
And,
same
and
species. Okay.
yeah, exactly the same species. It's just harvested and cultivated in slightly different ways.
Mhm.
Like, for example, they let them grow bigger to become portobello, which is just a marketing brand name for a larger Agaricus bisporus.
Wow.
And it, this dates back to the 1860s when this was really the only mushroom in America that was being cultivated, primarily in Pennsylvania, as like our home state of all mushroom cultivation in America, like commercial mushroom cultivation. So
Hmm.
so for the most part, Agaricus bisporus is a really delicious and healthy mushroom. It's great for regulating cholesterol, blood sugar in general. Um, but comparing it to something like a chanterelle, which cannot be cultivated.
Mhm.
So Agaricus bisporus is a decomposer, which means it's breaking down material in the environment. That's its natural state, is a decomposer. Whereas a chanterelle is a mycorrhizal fungi, which means that it has an intimate relationship with the plants that it grows with. And different species of chanterelle in different regions have different mycorrhizal relationships with different trees and plants. And so what they both have in common are fungal beta glucans, which
Mm.
are the they're a polysaccharide, a very specific kind of sugar that's locked up in the cell wall of the mushroom. And you need to break that cell wall using heat in order to make the fungal beta glucans bioavailable for us to, reap the benefits of as we consume them. And fungal beta glucans are kind of like the star of medicinal mushroom compounds. They're the ones that are, proven anti-inflammatory and immunomodulating. And we have soluble beta glucans and insoluble beta glucans. And the combination of these two are kind of like a powerhouse of health and wellness. And so you want both in terms of, you know, if you're using mushrooms medicinally.
Mhm.
And so a chanterelle will have a different chemical makeup than an agaricus bisporus. And like you said, its color, its flavor, and all of those things have a chemical reflection or
Yeah.
counterpart. So, like something like terpenes will create the aroma and the flavor, and the different qualities of those fungal beta glucans and the fibers will create the texture. And yeah, all of that matters when it comes to what functions those foods are playing in our body. Um, Chanterelles have high concentrations of terpenes,
Mhm.
and terpenes have a number of medicinal benefits. Specifically which ones we have in chanterelles, I'd have to go and check my books.
Yeah, yeah, but they're rich in it. I mean, you can it probably contributes a lot to their flavor as well. I mean, because
Oh,
terpenes are often volatile, like, they
absolutely.
contribute aroma, flavor to foods. Yeah.
And chanterelles are famous for their apricot-y floral aroma,
Mhm.
and Agaricus bisporus has a cousin that has an amaretto maraschino aroma as well,
Nice.
which is a same genus, different species of mushroom, another delicious edible mushroom. Yeah,
Great. Well, when
yeah.
I think of mushroom aromas, the other one that I immediately jump to is, of course, tartufo, as they call it in Italian.
Oh,
It's the truffle, and
oh
my
my,
brother-in-law he has a permit because you have to be permitted to collect these mushrooms in Italy. He
yeah.
has a permit to hunt for truffles, and he has a little dog that goes with him who's trained to, like, look for these, but these are mushrooms that grow underground, which is,
Yeah.
like, the craziest kind of foraging experience. I followed him one day with a video camera. He's like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "Just do your thing. I wanna see what you're doing." And what was amazing is he was looking up, and I'm like, "Why are you looking up?" And then he starts looking down. He was looking at the composition of species of different trees and shrubs, and then looking at different areas where there's higher acidity in the soil. And so he was looking for environmental clues as to where to find these underground mushrooms.
Yeah.
And then once the dog got into the area, they were able to kind of pinpoint, which area to go to dig up and gently look for these truffles. I'm wondering how often on, like, a fungal foray, are you looking at these other species? Like, is that an important factor? Or is that something very particular to truffles?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's always indicator species.
Mhm,
Whether you're looking at decomposers, white rot, brown rot fungus, or mycorrhizal species, you oftentimes you want to look for the tree that has the relationship with the mushroom. And you go, for example, in Colorado, I want to go look for porcinis, Boletus rubriceps, which is our famous wild mushroom here.
mhm.
And you go look for conifers and spruce at a certain elevation, and you go to the right zone and you increase your chances of finding that mushroom. Truffles are world famous, super valuable,
Mhm.
amazing fungus. Very difficult to find. That the art of finding them has become a science, not only through species indication. For example, people looking for flies
Mm.
that might hover around where truffles are buried, and then using different animals that can sniff out those special terpenes, like dogs and pigs are famous truffle hunters.
Mhm.
And what I learned recently, a couple of years ago, was that for pigs, truffles smell like sex. And
Oh,
so,
they get very excited when they smell
yeah,
it.
and so when
Yeah.
you find them, you have to like wrestle them back from eating the truffles.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's a fine balance of animal wrangling and truffle hunting. And one of the other cool things I learned about truffles recently was anandamide, which is a cannabinol found in truffles, which is one of the active components. I mean, there's something like 450 known active compounds in truffles. This is just one of them, and it's a fat soluble cannabinol. So what that means
Mm.
is that it's also found in cannabis plants,
Mhm.
which is a really unique connection. And we're discovering more that there are chemical connections between cannabis and different species of mushrooms because they're plugging in. For example, reishi polysaccharides will plug into our cannabinol receptors in our body.
Amazing. Yeah, it's incredible how you can have these classes of molecules that we find in some cases in both the plant kingdom, but also in the fungal kingdom, which are very different. I mean, I think it's important we recognize that fungi are unlike plants. They're unlike animals. I mean, that's why they're their own entire kingdom of
Yeah.
life. Um, wow.
Yeah.
So,
Can I
yeah,
share one more thing
please
about
do.
species, indicators? Morels, Morchella
Mm.
esculenta, very famous wild mushroom. Only in the last 5 years or so did we crack the code in cultivating morels. It's very highly prized, very expensive, very delicious mushroom, which is famous for fruiting in the spring. And you generally, and particularly in Colorado, everyone asks, like, where do you find morels? And of course, like, mushroom hunters are super territorial, like they don't give up their secrets that easily. But what I do like to share is how to find them. So for example, I was taught that when it's time to go look for morels, you're looking for the narrow leaf cottonwoods that have just started to leaf out in grassy floodplains, and you get the timing just right when the lilacs are blooming. And so
Very specific. I love it. It's like
exactly. So as you move, you can start looking for morels, say like as early as April in Colorado, and then as you move up in elevation, you can follow the changing of the season up. So the morels go later as you move up in elevation.
that's incredible. Well, and that's a part of our human tradition of living on the land that I feel like we've lost in so many ways. That this is such nuanced knowledge, but yet previously was pretty probably very commonplace that you knew how to follow the seasons, how to look for things during specific times or with certain indicator species. So I think it's always a wonderful thing when people can reclaim some of that ancestral knowledge, and you can do it with these fun groups. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about um, you know, are there mushroom clubs that you're involved in? I know here in Georgia we have the Georgia Mushroom Club and people go out and do forays, and you know it's a wonderful thing to go out and forage, but you should always do it with the right education, right? Because you don't wanna have an accidental event where you collect the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Um, so what advice do you have there about how people can learn more about this to do it correctly?
Absolutely. If you want to learn about mushroom foraging for edible purposes or medicinal purposes, definitely join your local mushroom club. Search your area. I'm sure if you have a mushroom club in your state, it is represented online somewhere. Colorado has three basically pretty big mushroom clubs: the Colorado Mycological Society, the Pikes Peak Mycological Society, and the Western Colorado Mycological Association. And we are now just learning about how to integrate ourselves with each other and share resources and talent and all of those things. But people will often tell you, like, depending on where you grow up, like, we're pretty disconnected from wild food in general and our food systems in general, which is a sad thing, but it is what it is. And foraging is a really fantastic way to kind of get back in touch with your own food. And there, people will talk about, oh, there's a general rule for this and a general rule for that, like never eat guild mushrooms or some absurd thing like that, or like never eat a mushroom that stains blue, or like, like there's just absurd things that people share which are generally untrue for the most part. And so joining your local mushroom club, going on forays with experts, and getting the mushroom guide for your area and ecosystem. Three critical components to taking a really positive step forward in being a well-informed mushroom hunter. But here's the thing. There is a general rule that's really good to follow when you're getting into foraging mushrooms. And that is, don't eat anything that you aren't 100% sure of. Like, there's not worth the risk to have a few bites of something and then find yourself sick. Now, most mushrooms are not toxic. Most mushrooms, that's also a common misconception that like all mushrooms are poisonous to some degree. This is not true. There are way more poisonous plants out there than there are mushrooms.
This
But
is true. Yeah.
to be fair, we know way less about mushrooms than we do about plants.
This is also true. Yes.
I think there's something like one mycologist to every botanist, or sorry, one mycologist to every 6 botanists. And this is a really interesting ratio because we built our entire, like, we inferred how many species there are based on this ratio and discovery of plants to mushrooms. So anyhow, that's another tangent. But in terms of general rules and being a safe mushroom hunter, um, if you're going to try a new mushroom for the first time, only have a couple of bites. Just taste it and see if your body reacts to it. Because even the most famous, well-known wild edible mushrooms like chanterelles, morels, porcinis, truffles, people have bad reactions to those too. Like any other food, it doesn't necessarily agree with everybody. We can't eat everything all the time. And so just keeping that in mind is really important. And then the other general rule is cook your mushrooms well, because cooking is a way of detoxifying if there are toxins in there. And that's true for plants as well. And and uh, and it makes them way more digestible. And I was talking about those insoluble and soluble fibers, the beta glucans.
Mhm.
Well, our bodies actually work really hard to digest raw mushrooms, and we evolved a an enzyme called acidic mammalian chitinase in order to digest mushrooms. And I don't know, for those of you out there who don't know what chitin is it's the cell wall of the mushroom that's also found in the shells of crustaceans and insects. So it's that super hard fibrous material that gives the mushroom strength to like push up through cement or break apart wood or whatever that, wherever they're trying to sort of emerge from. It makes them very strong, but it's also what contains the good medicine for us. And so cooking your mushroom basically makes that medicine bioavailable and digestible. But going back to the acidic mammalian chitinase, is when we try and digest undercooked or raw mushrooms, it automatically um, induces an innate immune response. So even though it might give you gas or a tummy ache,
Yeah.
it's actually strengthening your immune system at the same time.
Interesting. Okay. So going back to the average consumer of mushrooms that
Yeah,
you're getting these at the store or they're at the salad bar at your local cafeteria. You
sure.
have those sliced up button mushrooms. And we don't those are
Yeah.
served raw in salad bars. Is that
Oh,
good
yeah.
or bad for you? Like, what would you
Oh,
say?
this is a hot topic in the
Yeah.
mushroom community. Like, okay, all right, let me get into this. So Agaricus bisporus. Agaricus is the genus. So this is a whole category of mushrooms, a whole family of mushrooms. with multiple species in there. All of these species contain a compound called agaritine, which is a carcinogen, and it's related to hydrazine, which is like a component in like jet fuel and stuff. Like it's pretty gnarly stuff. Um, so this like people say, oh, don't eat raw mushrooms because there's a ton there's agaritine in there and it's a carcinogen and it's bad for you. Well, agaritine is heat sensitive, so you can destroy it by cooking your food. But if you were going to get sick from agaritine, you would have to eat a lot of raw mushrooms every day for many years for it to ultimately affect you in a negative way.
Mm.
So, like eating a little bit of raw mushroom in a salad here, or an undercooked mushroom on a pizza over there, or whatever, however you encountered, or nibbling on a fresh mushroom that is food,
Yeah, yeah.
not really going to hurt you in any meaningful way unless you have an allergy to it, which
Mm.
some people do have allergies to things like chitin. And you say like, oh, I can't eat mushrooms, it makes me sick. Well, maybe it's the chitin that's making you sick, and it's worth trying to have something like a mushroom extract, which doesn't contain any chitin or very, very little chitin. Which I have some examples of that in my community, of people are like, oh, I can't have mushrooms, but for some reason your mushrooms don't make me sick. I'm like, oh, it's probably because you have a sensitivity to chitin. Anyhow, another tangent.
No, no, but that's fascinating. Okay, so let's get into this then. Okay, so we have raw mushrooms. Maybe we should not be eating so many of those to cook them.
Yeah,
But
good
okay if
overkill.
you have a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So don't freak out at the salad bar. It's okay. um, and then there's the difference. We have cooked mushrooms, and then you have mushroom extract. And that's where I'd like to spend some time to kind of understand, if chitin is the building material of the mushroom, how does an extract remove the chitin, or what is that process? And I have the idea in mind, but I want you to kind of illustrate that for us of what how
Sure.
yeah, and what are you actually getting out of your mushroom extract if you're removing that chitin?
Right. So you start with a whole fresh mushroom, which is the reproductive organ of the mycelium, which is the main body of the organism. So it's important to understand the distinction between what a mushroom fruit body is and the mycelium. Just basic mycology 101. So the mushroom is the spore producing surface, the spore producing organ of this greater mycelium organism.
So if you think of like mycelia, these are almost like angel hair spaghetti all through the soil, right? And the mushroom is what we call a mushroom. It's just a part that emerges from the soil when it's time to reproduce. Is that what you're okay?
Right. A good
Yeah.
analogy is like the mycelium is the tree and the mushroom is the apple. There are some, this is a good enough analogy to
Yeah.
make people understand.
Okay. Great.
So you're not gonna hurt the tree by picking the apple,
Mhm.
but the tree needs the apple to reproduce.
Okay.
And as mammals, we're doing our part by eating that fruit and spreading the seeds and spreading the spores and helping propagate delicious species. So we take the mushroom, we dry it. That's generally the first step in the extraction process. We dry it and then we powder it. And then we run it through different processes in order to target different compounds. And so for this case, I'll use the example of beta glucans, which is a hot water under pressure extraction. So we literally pressure cook the mushroom powder, and then after, different species for different lengths of time and temperatures, and then we evaporate the water and we're left with this residue powder, and that's the extract.
And you've removed before you evaporate, are you removing the ground up mushroom bits, or does that stay in there?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, that's
So
removed. That's what we call the mark in the
yep.
extraction process. And this is let's just cooked fiber,
Mhm.
which has a ton of good practical applications both as food and as medicine, because we've basically cooked a bunch of mushrooms and now they're ready for whatever we want to use them for.
Awesome. For the listeners out there, I like to describe what a plant extract is. If you're making a hot plant, a water decoction or a hot water extraction of a plant. A lot of us do this every day when we make our pot of coffee, right? So
Yep.
you don't drink the grinds. You
Mhm.
pass the hot water through the grinds. That's the material. And then the only difference, I guess, with an extract is you'd then be taking that pot of coffee and evaporating the water, but keeping all the black goo at the bottom. So that's basically similar, a
Yeah,
good description, people can
yeah.
visualize that, okay.
We're making tea and then evaporating
Mhm,
the liquid to separate the liquids from the solids.
and those solids are your molecules that make up the chemistry of your
That's
material, okay.
that's right. So then we have this pure, um, bioavailable residue powder, and that makes up really the base of all of my mushroom extract powders. And this has like a kind of standardized we have created a standardized extraction system to reach a certain percentage of beta glucans, soluble beta glucans in those products. And so at minimum, they're going to be 30% beta glucan, but they often test higher, 35, 40, and oftentimes, 45, depending on the species, 45% beta glucans. And then to backpedal a little bit, we say, hey, wait a second, you just ran all of these delicious mushrooms through a heat and pressure system. Like, didn't you destroy anything in this process? And the answer to that is yes. Like, we destroy all of those volatile compounds that would be damaged by the heat. And so, if we're going to target those volatile compounds like terpenes, triterpenes, diterpenes, phenols, and different acids, um, we first do an alcohol extraction, a low temperature alcohol extraction to capture those volatile compounds. We then do the same evaporation process to separate the liquids and the solids. We put that aside, and then we run that mark, the used alcohol material, into the water pressure cooker to capture the beta glucans. So we're really milking that material as much as we can.
Yeah,
And we might run it through the process multiple times to get more and more out of it as much as we can. So in the end, you're really just left with fiber.
mhm, amazing.
And then you can reintroduce that fiber into these pure extracts to prevent it from clumping up, because those pure extracts, particularly with the beta glucan spec, is sticky sugars. Like, they're medicinal sugars. So they will clump together and get sticky. And so you have to mitigate that somehow. And that's why that fiber is a perfect material to reintroduce into the end product to keep it in powder form. And you're
I
getting the best of all of those components in one serving.
That's great, while at the same time breaking down anything that could be perhaps a bit irritant, right? Is that the idea? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what types of mushrooms do you most commonly use for this extraction process?
Well, this is a culturally dependent sort of answer. So let's talk about Americans. There are 5 or 6 really popular functional medicinal mushrooms available on the market now. The most popular of them all is Hericium erinaceus, which is also known as the lion's mane mushroom.
Oh,
And this
yes.
mushroom is famous for being basically the memory focus mushroom, the cognitive improvement mushroom. And I can speak for 2 hours on this mushroom alone. But the others are reishi, which is Ganoderma lingshire or Szechuanensis or Ganoderma lucidum. The taxonomy there is really, don't want to get lost in the weeds there, but reishi is the category. And reishi is kind of an everything mushroom in terms of how it benefits our body. But for the case of simplicity, I'll talk about it being a blood mushroom for heart, liver, lungs. It's really like, if there's one mushroom I had to choose to only take one, it would be reishi. Chaga, Inonotus obliquus, is a not technically a mushroom. It's not a fruit body of the organism. It's actually a sclerotia, which is a kind of mass of wood and mycelium mixed together, and it forms a kind of horn on the side of birch trees and other species, but it primarily grows on birch. And this mushroom has been used for centuries. It's famous for being full of melanin and very powerful antioxidant. And it's a common daily beverage in Eastern Europe and throughout Siberia and parts of Russia. So we've got lion's mane, reishi, chaga, cordyceps is a really popular functional medicinal mushroom, gourmet as well. Um, Cordyceps is famous for being the energy mushroom. So it contains a compound called cordycepin, which is an analog to ATP, adenosine triphosphate. But in this case, it's missing an oxygen molecule, so it's 3-deoxyadenosine, and it feeds our mitochondria. So it gives us energy from a cellular level.
Oh,
And
wow.
this is really important for just general health, vitality, virility. And because it's missing that oxygen molecule, it's a powerful antiviral because it literally suffocates viruses that try and feed on it. Um, so that's Cordyceps militaris is the commonly cultivated one, and then there's a very famous cousin to it in the Himalaya called Ophiocordyceps sinensis, which is like, I don't know if you've ever heard of this one, but it's like $25,000 per kilo. It can, there's
Wow.
mass migration of people into the Chinese Himalaya, Tibetan Himalaya to
Mm.
search for this mushroom that's very short season, like a 2-month window of opportunity to go and harvest this mushroom. But I made a film about that called Suklal's Hunt. um,
Amazing.
and let's see, turkey tail is the other
Mhm.
super famous, well-known medicinal mushroom. And this one is basically an immune modulator. It's famous for supporting our immune system. Basically, if you have an overactive immune system, it downregulates it. If you have an underactive immune system, it upregulates it. But it's also really famous as an anti-cancer medicine. It's actually used now as an official adjunct therapy to chemo treatments in Japan. And these are like really high concentrated extracts that are given to people who are undergoing these intense radiation and chemo treatments in
Wow.
order to help their bodies bounce back from these intense treatments and fortify your body so that you can get through those things. It's also super anti-tumor. Um, Now, with that being said, all of the mushrooms that I've mentioned have really great data to support them being anti-cancer in general, whether it being, inducing apoptosis or destroying tumors. There's tons and tons of research out there on these mushrooms as anti-cancer mushrooms. Um, and then there's a handful more obscure mushrooms that are dominant in the medicinal mushroom space, but not as popular from a consumer standpoint. Things like maitake, Graphola frondosa, amazing mushroom, delicious gourmet mushroom, oyster mushrooms, which are now becoming more and more common in the U.S. You can find them more and more in stores. Shiitake, lentinula eudodes, excuse me. Amazing gourmet mushroom, amazing medicinal mushroom. Um, and enoki is another common gourmet medicinal mushroom, uh, which
Incredible.
is which is the one that Flammellina volutipes. It's the skinny white one that grows in clusters. I don't know
Mm.
if you've seen it at stores before. Super
Oh,
sweet,
yes, I know what you're talking
slings
about.
like
Yeah.
cat.
Yeah.
Anyhow, all of these are medicinal and functional, but only those first 5 are really commonly available as supplements or extracts.
Incredible. Yeah, I mean, when you think about I think also I just wanna clarify for the audience, like, when we talk about anti-cancer, this is more chemo preventive, right? This is not stop your chemo and take mushrooms.
That's right.
It's
It's
it
adjunct.
is it's adjunctive, it's chemo preventive, it's supportive, and I think your example in Japan's a beautiful one. I actually had the opportunity to visit a Campo medicine clinic in Japan, last year, and what they do such a great job at is integrating, truly integrating Western medicine with pharmaceuticals, et cetera, surgeries,
Mhm.
what we would call quote unquote modern medicine with botanical and fungal medicines. So it's really very well integrated. So I could just imagine the use of fungi in that context. It's great.
I,
So when tell us a little bit about, so you talked about extracts. Tell us a little bit about the types of products that you offer with your line. We're almost out of time, so I want to make sure that we have a chance to talk about those. What are your best sellers? What are the ones that you find that you just like to take on a daily basis because of flavor or other functional benefits?
yeah.
And where can people learn more about them?
Absolutely. So I sell all of the mushrooms that I mentioned, those first five: chaga, reishi, turkey tail, cordyceps, lion's mane. In addition, I also sell agarikon, which is a powerful antiviral, wild harvested, and Amanita muscaria, which is another wild harvested, powerful medicinal mushroom. Those very complicated subjects on their own.
Yeah.
Um, my top sellers are Body Blend, which is reishi, chaga, cordyceps, and turkey tail. This is like the fortification blend.
Mhm.
Um, Blends are really popular because people don't necessarily know where to start, and
Yeah.
so they take them all. And this is four of the top immune modulating, anti-inflammatory, antiviral mushrooms in a meaningful combination, so you're getting enough of each one to make it matter, compared to these other mushroom blends that are like 10 super mushroom blend and 17 different mushroom blend. And I'm like, you're getting like 50 milligrams of each one. Like, it doesn't really jive with me. My other popular product is Mind Mix, which is lion's mane and cordyceps. And I like to say that this is do better longer. Do better is the lion's mane because it improves cognitive function, and longer is for the cordyceps because it's the energy mushroom. And cordyceps is really the one I take the most for myself. It's I I get used to it, and I alternate between taking an extract and taking a non-extract. And this way, I think I'm getting the most from it because I don't develop a kind of tolerance to it. It always retains a visceral effect. And the way I feel this is that I feel vital when I take it.
Mm.
And I sleep better at night because it helps reset circadian rhythms. But it also gives me energy from that cellular level, which is super important because, compared to something like caffeine, which doesn't give us energy, um, it actually prevents us from being tired, which is an important distinction.
Yeah.
And both of these taste super yummy. The Body Blend is like an earthy umami flavor, and the Mind Mix is kind of a sweet umami flavor.
Mhm.
And you can drink these just as they are. You just put a teaspoon in the bottom of your cup, add hot water, stir it in, and take it like that. But I like to mix it in my coffee because I'm a coffee snob and I love my coffee, and I had drink it a very particular way. But I basically mix mushroom drink with like 1-to-1 with espresso.
Oh, that's what I was gonna ask you because I am very spoiled. I have my cappuccino served every morning. It's kind of like leave the coffee by the door for the dragon. So maybe I may have to try and take it that way to blend it
Yeah.
in because
I mean,
yeah.
I was just going to say adding it to your daily beverage routine is the way to do it because
Mhm.
then you remember to take it. And the important thing is that you're taking it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that's great. Fantastic. Well, thanks so much, Hamilton. And I know that you also had a special offer as we come up to the holidays for our listeners. Tell us about where they can find out more about your products and tell us about that special offer you have for us.
Sure. Yeah, you can find my mushrooms online at hamiltonsmushrooms.com. It's spelled the way it sounds. For your audience, I made a special discount code Foodie10 for 10% off any of the 100-gram bags, which are $40 to start, which is 100 servings. So it's like 3 months worth of mushrooms for $40 plus your 10% discount. And highly recommend, like, if you're curious about this, or if you know someone who doesn't sleep well or has low energy or poor focus or like anxiety, giving them the gift of mushrooms for Christmas or Hanukkah or whatever you're celebrating is a wonderful gift because not only is it not something that's going to sit around the house, it's consumable and it makes you feel better.
Amazing. Wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Hamilton, for coming to the show. It was really great chatting with you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I was super nervous before we started, but you immediately made me feel comfortable, and I really appreciate that. Thank you
Oh,
so much,
no.
Sandra.
This was fun. Great. All right. You've been listening to Foodie Pharmacology, the science podcast for the food curious. Thanks for tuning in this week. And also, just to let you know, we've got a great season coming up. We've got season 7 coming after the holidays. So be sure to stay tuned. In the meantime, you can check out all of our former episodes. We have over 100 amazing discussions about all topics related to food and health. Thanks so much to our producers, to Rob Cohen and Christine Roth, for putting on a great show for you each and every week. And thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in. That's it for today. Stay healthy out there, and I'll see you next time.